Hi, I'm Jonah Essers with the Tummy Handbook. Welcome back to my series of videos on food allergies in infants and toddlers. In my first 10 videos, we covered a lot of basic topics around food allergies, and I encourage you to go back and watch those videos. And in my last 5 videos, we're going to cover some more advanced topics. In this video, we're going to discuss when to treat reflux or regurgitation as a sign of food allergy. So reflux, regurgitation, spit up, the act of having your child ruin your carpet, the car interior, the airplane seat in front of you. This is a rite of passage for many families. And most children have routine run-of-the-mill spit-ups that are not medically concerning. However, some families have the intuition that there could be more to the story, that there could potentially be a sign of food allergy. So let's discuss how to know when you should address this as a sign of food allergy. And we know that food allergies lead to inflammation. Think eczema or hives in the skin. Well, imagine that inflammation inside the GI tract, specifically in the esophagus or in the stomach. So when there's inflammation in the GI tract, we can potentially see vomiting or reflux. So how do you distinguish routine run-of-the-mill reflux from food allergy? The short answer is you can't. Clinically, in most children, they look quite the same. So you really have to think about this a little bit more like taking a bet or taking a gamble that the reflux that you're seeing is potentially a sign of allergy. And let's discuss the 3 bets that you can potentially take. The first bet is to bet on food elimination. So the question for you is, are you willing to ask a breastfeeding mother to start removing top 8 allergens? Are you willing to put your baby on a hypoallergenic formula to see what happens? And are you willing to take several weeks to see if there's some improvement? So for babies with relatively mild symptoms, most families are not willing to put their family through these dietary manipulations. However, as the signs and symptoms get more severe, generally families are willing to put up with the inconvenience of dietary changes. Next, let's talk about betting on medication. Antacid medications, anti-reflux medications, potentially can be helpful in treating run-of-the-mill reflux, but it's often not helpful. It's also potentially helpful in allergic reflux, but often not helpful either. And lastly, medication can potentially come with some long-term safety issues. So is this a bet you're willing to take? Again, for kids with relatively mild symptoms, most families are really not interested in medication. For families with relatively severe symptoms, it potentially becomes a viable option. Personally, as a practitioner, I'm not a huge fan of using medications to treat reflux. However, there are some situations where it is definitely worth trying. And if I'm going to use it, I consider a directed trial of medication for 2 to 4 weeks maximum. If we're not seeing any improvement in symptoms, I stop right away. If we are seeing improvement, and that improvement is potentially a game changer, we try to find the minimum effective dose that works, and we try to taper it as frequently as we possibly can. Lastly, let's take the bet that you can just wait this out. So for babies with relatively mild symptoms, a watch and wait approach is potentially a good bet. And that's always something that you can renege on if your symptoms start to get worse. So a watch and wait approach is definitely reasonable. However, as your baby starts to approach about a year of age, when we would expect run-of-the-mill reflux to start to settle, if you notice that as you've introduced an advanced solid food, that the reflux is getting worse and worse, or it's really not settling at all, after about a year of age, it's potentially worth reconsidering with your primary care doctor, or potentially an allergist, or a pediatric gastroenterologist, whether a further evaluation is needed. So when do you know if you have to do something for the reflux? I think about 4 potential categories that would push me to want to do something and address the reflux. Number 1 is if there's feeding difficulties. If the reflux is associated with trouble swallowing, failure to advance to solid food, or general disinterest in eating, generally that's something that's worth addressing sooner rather than later. Next, I think about vomiting. If the vomiting is really aggressive, if there's retching and dry heaving, if there's a lot of pain, and whether it translates to trouble feeding afterwards, something that probably should be addressed sooner rather than later. Next, I think about poor weight gain. If your child is not growing well, in conjunction with spit-ups or vomiting, something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. And lastly, I think about other overt signs of allergy. If there's a lot of eczema, blood and mucus in the stool, hives, that in conjunction with the reflux suggests that maybe we should start to manage that sooner rather than later. Lastly, as just something to remember, that most of these reactions that lead to regurgitation or spit-ups we feel are probably non-IgE mediated reactions. Please go back to video 1 if you're still not sure what a non-IgE mediated reaction is. And because of non-IgE mediated reactions taking time to develop and time to resolve, you really need to make sure that if you make a change like medication or a dietary manipulation, that you at least wait a few weeks to see if the reflux settles before deciding whether it is or is not working. So in summary, as an isolated complaint, reflux from allergy is usually indistinguishable from run-of-the-mill reflux. If your child has other warning signs of allergy, it's reasonable to bet on allergy with either dietary changes, medication, or potentially just a watch and wait approach. Using medication for reflux in allergy is plus minus. I'm generally not a huge fan, but in some severe cases, definitely worth considering. If the reflux is mild, a watch and wait approach is certainly reasonable. And lastly, if you're approaching about the year mark, the year of age mark, if you haven't really noticed significant improvement in the reflux or the reflux seems to be worsening as solid food is advanced, definitely worth revisiting with your primary care doctor to see if a referral to an allergist or a pediatric gastroenterologist is reasonable. As always, if you have any questions about my videos, please leave me a comment in the section below. You can also check out my Instagram account at the link below. Thanks again for watching.